Hello, everybody. I'm glad you could join me on this is Christmas Day, 2014. But Jesus wasn't born in December 25th. He was born in July, and but this is when the official day of our country celebrates his birthday. And this is about love, the love of God, and how we know that God is love. And despite reading the Bible, because it says in the Bible that whenever you read about Moses, the veil is over everybody's eyes, and there's a judgment about mankind in it, and punishment, and that's the punishment system. That's not the love system. God is love because he created man in his image, and men are love. Sure, you can get lost. Men can get lost, and they can get lost and caught up in other things and lose that ability. But the ability is there to be love, and is often lost in just trying to stay alive, because that's how our system is set up, that if you can't make it, you really have a hard time. And they make it so that you have to pay things and do things, and it just is too hard. Our systems are not, our bodies are not set up for trauma. And if we get trauma, it really wreaks havoc on our systems. But when God created man, he gave him his personality, and men like to be believed in. That is love to a man. To be believed in. That a man can do anything that he sets out to do. And without question, that is what men expect. They don't know how to say it to anybody else, but that is what they're always looking for. And that is what God is. He just expects you to believe in him and go to him for your salvation. Though it says that if you believe in Christ, you will be saved, it's God who made that happen. And Christ did it out of love for God and everybody else. And that's why God did it. But it's ultimately God that we're praying to through Jesus Christ. It was God's will, but Jesus Christ made it happen. And part of that love is asking God for what you need. And if you're always willing to be saved and open to what God has to say, and know that you are not smart enough, and I am not smart enough to solve anything by ourselves. And God will come in and God will help you. And when God shows you something that out of love, it's to correct you, because he loves you. He's not going to show you something that you're already doing. And in that, you will look for others who have had that happen to them. And you're hoping for something that somebody knows that's more than what you know, so that you can solve the problems. Salvation is the biggest thing, and people take a great risk by just not doing anything about it. We get the John 3:16, for God so loved the world he gave his only begotten Son, right? And when you read Moses in the Old Testaments, and you get that veil over your head, you wonder why God did all that destruction to everybody. It's not that God didn't give them a chance, because God will always go to everybody, and God will always present himself. And appoint a representative to tell everybody about it. And whether everybody wants to listen or not, and God will save a whole nation, a whole community, a whole city, just because there's a few people there that believe in him and want to do what he wants, even though everybody else is evil. You get the Sodom and Gomorrah story, that it was just the one family, and they had to leave because God was going to destroy them. They refused God, blatantly refused him. It doesn't say that, but that's what happened. The Bible does not have to say every single detail for everybody to get it. There's a lot of things in there, and that's the contrast between those who wanted to be like God, like Eve wanted to be like God. Moses wanted to be like God. Everybody that's a main character in the Bible wanted to be like God. He was the example they wanted. And that is love. And God did it out of love for those people. He didn't destroy Adam and Eve. But just because he said to Eve, or to Adam and Eve, that man would always rule over, I don't even know if he said it to them, but man will rule over the females, doesn't mean with an iron fist. That's not what God meant. The Bible, when it talks, is talking about God's church, God's way, not everybody else's way. See? And there's a difference between the two. There's everybody else's way, which is punishment, and then there's God's way, that is a type of a reward. And God's not going to punish somebody totally because they wanted to be like him, just because they disobeyed. God expected it because he knows what some people want to do. So all those people who died on purposely went against God. Look at the Israelites. The Israelites stood, if you actually read it, stood, and Moses introduced God to the Israelites. And they all stood there, and they backed up out of fear because they didn't want to be destroyed. And they all agreed. Every single one of them agreed with God. And as soon as God left and Moses left, they did what they wanted to do. They went right back to their old way of doing things, didn't change what they were doing, and did it on purpose. And they did it because there was a few individuals who threw it up in everybody's face. And it's the one thing in God's eyes throughout history that got them in trouble, because even with the new temple, with the old temple before it was destroyed, they were going more for the popularity and the giving the gifts. It didn't matter if they were right or wrong or they represented God or anything like that. It was more selfish reasons and political reasons of supporting other people in what they were doing than doing what God wanted to do. So God destroyed the Israelites several times. He allowed them to live, but all those other people that they had to fight blatantly refused God too. But God was set in destroying everybody because if you are saved, or let me put it like this, dang, it's a hard thing to say. Once you're born for the resurrection, the thing is to do, seek out God and do what God wants. If you don't do what He wants, then you no longer have a purpose for being alive. He may come in, depending, and put an end to things because people are not doing what He wants. But okay, let's get into that part about the love part, because like I said, Christ did what He did out of love for God and us. This is way beyond us. So living in a state of love and compassion is a lot different than living in a state of hate and misery. Hate and misery is kind of what you see everybody doing to each other. They'll say, well, gee, you lost your house, you're a bad person, and this and that, and you're just unworthy to be alive, And people do that to you, and like even in a workplace, somebody will look at you if you can't keep up, that you're worthless and you shouldn't be there, and that really becomes the hate and punishment thing. There's nothing there for out of love. And after a long time of being in that situation, it really becomes a downer. Because then when your health fails and all that, it's not a very good thing. So love is a different state of being, and it really is something that is separate from everybody else. And when you're in that state, there's a certain way to be, and you try to grow, and you have to do things in a certain order. And in my other videos, I tell people what that order is to be happy. There's a time and a place for everything. And if you get caught up in this kind of system and what everybody else is caught up in, then you really are in that state of misery, because it really hasn't changed from the Bible days. What people are like, if you get a prophet that comes out and starts saying that this is what God is, and this is what God would like, and this is, and people just look at you because it's taught to look at people like that and think that they're crazy, that it must be their imagination. and people are really cynical and critical about it. When, out of love, and you're doing something for God out of love, is really a different state altogether. It's not in that ordinary life system. Because God can actually give gifts to people that are of love. He can change them. But when he does that, those people normally don't realize that they are separate from everybody else now. They're in the same boat as far as salvation. God's not a respecter of people. But at the same time, there is a big difference in how you go about doing something. Now, I've actually talked to a bunch of kids over the years and I've taught these systems to them that I'm talking about in my videos, and most just think they're going to do what they want to do anyway. But once in a while, there's somebody that takes it to heart and will actually go through that process. And they do so much better in life than anybody else. I know that most of those kids are still struggling. They're struggling to make it in this world. They can't get ahead. They don't know what to do. And they're just plain lost in society. And where the people that have taken what I've said to heart have really exceeded in life, way beyond anybody else. And that is love. When you do something, you do it out of love because it's part of an agreement. It's like, I don't know God without an agreement. I had to have made an agreement. Moses had to have made an agreement. Everybody has to make an agreement, except for Adam and Eve. They just automatically knew because their dad was their dad, right? And they don't understand the concept of dad and the family. And so when you look at that picture of dad and the family and you overlay it over the top of God and Adam and Eve, then you start to see what is actually real. And then all the children that come off of Adam and Eve throughout the centuries, whether it's 6 centuries maybe, no, wait a minute. I think it's like 5,500 years. It's not that old. Not as old as people think. And that's just because rocks have the age of rocks. And when things die, they get the age of the rocks. And so it's kind of hard to tell. It gets all mixed up. And but people are not that old, because if you do the math, say a couple having 4 children in 100 years span, and those children divide off and make say 2 couples, and that's the average. And if you do the math every 100 years, you get an astronomical figure in 5,000 years. You get more than the population of the earth by a great deal. And then if you take into consideration wars, death, and all that, and the families that would not be, I don't even know if you come close to the population that would still be an overshoot with the numbers. So I've actually sat with a pencil and paper and figured that scenario out. Not sure if I figured it out 2 for the first one, 4 for the second, on up for each generation. But you still come up with a very big number. So we haven't been here that long to overpopulate the earth. It's just how we use it. And part of God's love in creating us was not to live with nature, but to be able to use it in such a way that benefits the planet and us at the same time. Whether that's in organic stuff or not, I don't know, but we're supposed to have a good grasp on it. And so we're talking about God's love, and He is love. And there's just a ton of scriptures in the Bible that talk about love. You see, and if we go through a process where we grow ourselves into a situation where we can actually help others, it's not about helping everybody if you can't afford to help anybody. You know, like I said, it's a closed system. Well, how can a house divided against itself, even Jesus said it cannot stand. So if you have one person that's been changed into love, and they're trying to do everything in a loving manner, it won't matter if that person exists or not, because the people that are around that individual will still be the other way. They'll be cynical, they'll be hateful, they will feel deserving even though they haven't earned anything, and demanding on the individual, and that is changed into love. So it cancels it out. Even though those people are benefiting from it, they still will not do what they're supposed to do because they don't have any love in them. That is love. And part of love is giving off a good example. People do what they see. They don't do what they hear. So your children are going to do what they see. And if the learning curve for the parents is one way, the children's is going to be that way too. So the learning curve, say, may be later on in life in most cases for the parents, the learning curve comes later on in life when they decide that the things that they did earlier weren't as important as they thought they were. Okay, but you get the kids, and they're trying to make it in the world, and they don't want to do it their parents' way because they weren't given a good example. So they try to reinvent the wheel. and then they wind up in worse trouble than the parents that taught them. So then they have to revert back. Eventually, they have to revert back to how the parents did it. See, and the difference between that and the love concept is that you're not learning from the world to tell your kids that, hey, I earn the money, I make the rules. Instead, you're setting an example. This is how you do it. This is what I'm doing. And you have to actually tell them that. Because it doesn't work the other way. It just confuses them and will confuse them for a very long time. They may not ever figure it out. Okay, and it causes a trauma within them. Because then if it gets really bad because you're trying to force your children to do something that they don't want to do, I'm not saying that can be a bad thing. Because it can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. But the trauma in itself makes them say to themselves that they're not going to treat their children like that when they grow up. So you'll get the contrast between example and do as I say and not as I do. And that's the forces that drive the money. So it's better if an individual, before they have a family, establishes themselves, has their car and everything paid for, a little bit of a bank account, and has the ability to have children and show them the good examples in life. This is how you do it. Because when you have to live a forced life, then you're going to get that spirit in you, and you're going to pass that spirit on to your children. So whether it's a good spirit or a bad spirit, that's what's getting passed to your children. But with good examples, your children can see those examples, and because you're actually doing those examples. It's when you do the do as I say and not as I do thing that they really have a hard time. They're not going to do anything out of love for you. So then when you look at that picture and you overlay it over God's picture, then you have a better concept of God and the world, which is God's family. Because even though the Bible says that that Jesus was his only begotten Son, I mean, if you actually, I have to look at the word begotten, because there's something there in that word that, because if you ever had somebody that you've went and seen, they may be a relative and they're not, but they're a lot older, and you're doing things with them, then they might say something to the effect that you're more of a son than my own son is. And that's the thing about families, is you can hold grudges against a family member, and then you don't want to see them. You don't want to be around them, see? Whatever case that may be. So I'm hoping I'm making sense with this about God's family. Because, Adam and Eve were probably the closest ones, some of the closest people to God within his family in heaven. And when God says he knew us before we were born, it's because he did. We were there as spirits in his kingdom, in one of his kingdoms. Some people call that the pre-existing world. And they're actually worlds, like this one, but in a different kind of way. You know, the one where we come from might be that of ice. You couldn't exist in this world because of that. And like the ice giants, maybe. I think that's where the giant